Tonight, before you go to bed, you'll set your thermostat, maybe to 19 or 20 degrees Celsius. Press a button, and that's that. Now delete that button. Delete the heating, the insulated walls, the double-glazed windows, the synthetic blankets, everything. Outside it's -30. The wind is howling at 60 kilometers an hour. The night will last 16 hours, and tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, for 6 months. This is the world your ancestors lived in 20,000 years ago at the peak of the last ice age. Not just a few isolated individuals, entire populations across generations in conditions that would kill a modern human in a matter of hours. They didn't just survive, they built, they planned, they innovated. But how? With what? The answer might surprise you. And what they developed to stay alive is far more sophisticated than anything we've ever given them credit for. Let's start by destroying the image we all have in our heads. The caveman, the cave, the smoky campfire, the cold seeping in everywhere. Day-to-day survival. That image is wrong, or at least radically incomplete. Most Ice Age archaeological sites aren't caves, they're constructions. Shelters built deliberately, chosen with care, designed with a thermal logic that took archaeologists decades to fully understand. First principle, go underground. When outdoor temperatures plunge to -30, the ground a meter down stays at a stable temperature of around 0. 0 is cold, but it's 30 degrees warmer than the air outside. Our ancestors knew this, not in scientific terms, in practical, hands-on terms, passed down from generation to generation. So they dug, not just for shelter, to steal heat from the earth itself. The shivering cave never really existed. What stood in its place was far more impressive and far more unexpected. In 1965, archaeologists working near the village of Mezhyrich in Ukraine made a discovery that would change our understanding of prehistory. A farmer was digging his cellar. His shovel struck something. He kept digging. What he found wasn't a single bone, it was an entire structure. A 15,000-year-old dwelling built almost exclusively from mammoth bones and tusks. 4 similar structures would be uncovered at the same site. Let's take a moment to grasp what that means. Each structure used the remains of 60 mammoths on average. The lower jawbones served as foundations, stacked in neat rows to form the walls. The skulls formed the framework. The tusks, some weighing over 100 kilograms, were curved to create the arches of the roof. This isn't improvised survival. This isn't grabbing whatever you find and piling it up at random. This is planning, selection, architecture. The whole thing formed a structure able to bear the weight of a carefully assembled cover of animal hides. 3 layers, one on top of the other, fur, dry vegetation, a wind-resistant outer shell. 3 distinct thermal functions. The same physics as a modern insulated wall, just 20,000 years earlier. Comparative studies have shown that these structures, properly reconstructed, reach thermal performance comparable to modern Arctic shelters. The materials were different. The physics was identical. Your ancestors didn't endure the cold, they understood it. But building a solid shelter isn't enough when the temperatures outside are lethal. You need fire. And managing fire in an enclosed space is a science in itself. Fuel first. During the Ice Age on the Great Plains of Central Europe, trees were scarce. Wood was a precious, limited resource. How do you keep a fire hot enough to survive a night at -30 when wood is in short supply? Our ancestors found a solution that archaeologists at first struggled to believe. Get ready. The answer is as simple as it is unexpected. They burned bones. Animal bones, saturated with fat, burn. Not as easily as wood. You have to heat them enough first. But once they catch, they give off intense, long-lasting heat. At Ice Age sites, archaeologists find hearths holding massive quantities of burned bone, not as food waste, but as deliberately chosen fuel. It's a counterintuitive solution, elegant, and perfectly suited to an environment where mammoths were plentiful and forests rare. And these hearths weren't laid out at random. A central hearth provided the main heat. Smaller secondary hearths were placed around it, one for preparing food, another for working tools. Infants and the elderly occupied the spots closest to the warmth. The layout wasn't instinctive. It was thought out, organized, passed down. Last challenge: ventilation. Keeping a fire going in an enclosed space poisons the air. Without circulation, the occupants suffocate before they freeze. At several sites, archaeologists have identified openings positioned on purpose: low ones to draw in fresh air, high ones to release warm air heavy with moisture. This isn't instinct, it's learned, it's passed on, it's perfected over generations. Managing fire in the Ice Age wasn't a primitive act of survival. It was a complex technical skill handed down like precious know-how. But the cold still had one card left to play, and this one no one saw coming. When the cold forces everyone to huddle together, something changes. Interactions intensify, stories circulate, knowledge spreads faster. The extreme cold of the Ice Age didn't just force humans to share a shelter. It forced them to share their knowledge, their fears, their stories, night after night, for millennia. And that forced closeness produced something no one would have predicted. In the Czech Republic, at a site 26,000 years old, we find the oldest known ceramics in human history. Animal and human figurines fired in a rudimentary kiln. Among them, a small female statuette, one of the oldest human representations ever discovered. These objects weren't created in spite of the cold, they were created because of it. They passed down their knowledge around a fire. If you'd like stories like this one to keep reaching you, there's a button for that. And it's far easier to find than the remains of a mammoth. Subscribe. Because cold brings us together. Because the long nights around the fire create the time and space for something survival alone never produces. Culture. Art. The passing on of knowledge. The stories that give meaning to suffering. The rituals that make death bearable. Tonight, you'll set your thermostat, and behind that ordinary gesture, that button you'll press without a second thought, there are 20,000 years of engineering, of transmission, of accumulated knowledge. Humans who dug into the ground to steal a few degrees from the earth, who learned to burn bone when wood ran out, who built homes from the remains of mammoths and organized their hearths with an engineer's precision. They had no thermostat. They had something harder to acquire and far more precious. They knew how to survive together. And that, perhaps, is the true legacy of the Ice Age. Not the technology, not the engineering, but the idea that, faced with a cold that kills, the only answer that truly works is each other.